Hey guys, it's Dom from Mobile Dom, and I'm sorry for the framing here. If I tilt the camera up, you can't see any of this. So I'm gonna try and stay a bit hunched down so my head is still in frame. Now, this is a different video than I'm used to. I'm back at the coffee table, mainly because if you follow me on social media, you know that I have fractured my ankle and torn the ligaments off. So standing isn't really my thing at the moment. So expect to see a couple of reviews done sitting down, just because I can't stand up for more than a few seconds at a time without being in incredible pain and becoming extremely tired. But let's get on with today's video, and that is this. This kind of heavy thing is the PrimaCreator P120. And for those of you that don't know, this is a desktop 3D printer. So all of the things you see in front of me, and don't worry, I know you can't really see them, there will be B-roll of all of these models. All of the things you see in front of me were printed on the P120. Certain things, like this Venus de Milo, were printed all in one go, whereas things like this 75% scale model of the Darksaber hilt from Star Wars was printed in multiple pieces. And that is for a very good reason. The P120, to get it down to a desktop size, and this is like desktop, it is literally sitting on my desk when I'm not reviewing it over here. So it is quite literally a desktop 3D printer. The P120 has a build volume of 120 millimeters by 120 millimeters by 120 millimeters. So that means if what you're trying to print can fit inside of that, or in the case of these two lightsaber hilts, can be scaled down, you're golden. And I have found two things, and this is my first 3D printer. I have found two things. 120 on the X and 120 on the Y for most things is actually big enough. The only thing I think that got close to taking up the entire build volume was these. And again, I'll put B-roll in. These are table joiners. So where would this go? This one goes in that corner. This one can go there. This one goes there. And this last one goes there. And you put a piece of 1x2 in the slots of each of them, and it creates the table frame, and underneath there is a slot for a leg. So you print these four off and go and get a length or two of 1x2, probably pine because it's the cheapest, and then a sheet of MDF, and you've just made yourself a table. Now, these are actually printed in the standard PLA, which is quite rigid. I wouldn't use it for extreme load-bearing stuff, so I wouldn't put like a drill press on it. But for me, it is going to be holding a Nespresso machine and a inkjet printer, so not very heavy things. X and Y, more than enough. 120 is pretty fine. There was very few things I couldn't actually print at all because I needed them to be a certain size and I couldn't scale them. So things like phone cases, unless I wanted to chop them up, which I think kind of defeats the purpose, wouldn't fit. So none of the phones I own are less than 120 millimeters tall. The real limiting factor I found here is the Z height, or Z height if you're in America. Now the Z height is how tall things can be. Now while 120 by 120 in the X and Y is kind of tall enough, these, like the Geyer Anderson cat here, Anubis, and the Venus de Milo, these are pretty much about as tall as you can print in one go without trying to scale them or slice them up. And again, if you're okay with slicing them in half and then gluing them together afterwards, that's fine. But I do genuinely think that the P120 could have dealt with a slightly larger Z height. So maybe 150 or 180 would have been nice, because if I could have had it at so we say 180, so the larger side, I would have been able to print Qui-Gon Jinn's lightsaber hilt at full size instead of at 50%. I also would have been able to print the Darksaber hilt at 100% instead of 75%. So there are downsides to having a very large printer, such as the G-Max 1.5 XT Plus or the brand new, very popular Creality CR10. Mainly that is amount of material used and build time. But I do think 120 by 120 by 120 is just a little bit too small. And it wouldn't really change the footprint apart from the height. And I think adding an extra 30mm to the Z height would have really helped the P120, at least in my eyes. I guess I'll just speak about the printer a little bit more. So this little thing here comes off. This is your spool holder. It doesn't lock into place, and well, that's about it. It is a folded, what I think is steel. It doesn't flex like aluminium does, and it's somewhat hefty. It just slots into place, and when you have your roll of filament, which for me is slightly out of frame, and it would put me in a lot of pain and take me a long time to go and get it. So again, I'll put some B-roll in. Your filament roll, this sits on this and feeds up here to what is the start of the Bowden Extruder, and I'll get back to that in a minute. This spool holder is just okay. I feel like it could have done with a retaining screw in the middle. So if you're using a filament sample, so I recently got a set of, I think it was 8 colors from Rigid Ink, who, spoiler, does fantastic filaments. But they don't come on full spools because they're short. I think they're 10-meter samples. Now, because it's coiled and it's trying to pull it up, the filament, when it's coiled up, is actually strong enough to just lift this out of place. And I've heard clangs from other rooms when I come back in. Nothing's gone wrong, but the filament has lifted the spool holder off. So one change I would make is adding a retaining nut or screw to the filament holder. We go up, we see an addition that I've added, which is a little spinning ballerina. So underneath here is a motor that spins a hopped gear here. Now what this is, the filament comes up here, and again, put some B-roll. Filament comes up here through this hole, down this tube, and comes out the hot end. This is called a Bowden Extruder instead of a direct drive where the filament would go straight into here. So there is a little spring-loaded action here. So you push this open and push the filament in, and what is basically here is just a little bearing to help it guide. And what this is attached to is a little teethed gear or toothed gear that just grabs onto the filament lightly and pushes it through. So this actually just spins when in use, and as a ballet dancer I find that quite nice and just a little bit, quite cute. It's not functional, it's just there, and it's quite nice. So going on, oh, God, this is actually quite hard to see from behind. All of this, as you can tell, is folded steel. It is quite heavy. I think it's 4.5 kilos, just like this. And this comes assembled. Like the only thing you've got to add is this spool holder, which, to be honest, if you already have a printer or you have an external spool holder, I'd use that over this, because it kind of sucks. But aside from this spool holder, this is how this comes. You don't have to attach the bed or the X, Y, and Z motors, or the display, or anything like that. This is a ready-to-run kit. So much so that when I got it, it was within 15 minutes of opening the box, I was already starting to print, which is absolutely amazing. So if I push this forward here, this is your build area. And again, put some B-roll in. This is 120 by 120, and it is a heated bed. Now, I've changed the build surface on this because they also sent me a sheet of PEI, which is meant to be a really good surface for prints. Apparently it stays quite hot, so prints stick, and when it cools down, prints auto release. And for the most part, that is what I found. It isn't perfect, and I'll get back to that later in the review when I talk about the downsides to this printer. So a good thing about the bed on the P120 is that it is actually a heated bed. So for those of you that don't know, all of this in front of me was printed in PLA. So PLA stands for polylactic acid. It's a cornstarch or sugarcane, one of the two, based plastic. It's non-toxic, it's somewhat biodegradable, and it doesn't really have much of a smell. Actually, no, that's not true. This yellow PLA from Rigid Ink smelled really sweet, almost like cinema popcorn. So that's nice compared to ABS, which is a petroleum-based plastic and has quite a acrid type smell. These actually had no smell whatsoever or a really nice smell. But PLA doesn't require a heated bed, whereas ABS does. So having a heated bed on the P120 really does actually open up the range of materials you can print on it. So you can do PLA, you can do ABS, you can do HIPS, which is high impact polystyrene, you can do PETG, PET, you can do nylons. There are a lot of things you can print. Now, would I recommend you print those on the P120? I can't say, because I have only printed in PLA so far. I am getting a small amount of ABS and PETG in, so I will update this video or make a separate one with how the P120 prints those. The way you interface with the P120 is via this screen and this input knob. And again, this input knob is not what was on the P120. This is one I actually printed on the P120 to replace the one that was on there originally, because it was pretty rubbish. It was really hard to feel. There was no grip points. This is knurled. This is knurled all the way around, and it's raised so it's easier to grip onto and know that you've actually done something. So it's a 360-degree dial with a click in, and this is not a touchscreen. I initially thought this was, and it's not. It is a very nice screen, quite high resolution, bright colours, but I really kind of wish it was a touchscreen, because even with this new dial, this new knob, sorry, this dial kind of sucks. If you try to do any fine type of adjustment and then click in, oftentimes it will jog forward or back one, which nearly caused me to print a couple of things I didn't want to, because it was the next one down. So I'm just going to take this off, because otherwise I'm going to keep playing with it. If I move the printer around, on the side here, again, I'll put some B-roll in, there is a micro SD card slot, which is here, and a micro USB slot. Why did I take this out when I can't see it to put it back in? There we go. There's a micro SD card slot and a micro USB port for tethering. I would not recommend tethering, because your your computer that you're tethering to cannot go to sleep, cannot be turned off. It needs to have a constant connection to a computer that is always on. So I have printed most things on the P120 via SD cards. It just takes standard G code I've printed from Cura, and that's pretty much all I've done, apart from a couple of times where I printed via Wi-Fi, which is pretty cool, but it has its limitations. So unlike using something like Octoprint or anything like that, the web interface for the P120 is an upload box, so you can upload G-code, start, stop, and temperature control. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you can't see the status of a print. You just know how far in it is. You can't see a camera feed if you've got a camera set up. You can't tell if there's a nozzle jam. Sorry, sore throat. You can't tell if there's a nozzle jam. The printer will just keep going. So it's quite a dumb web interface. It's quite literally for uploading G-code, pressing start, and setting temperatures. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but there are some much more advanced web interfaces, and I do think that the P120's web interface could be improved. So I would stick with slicing things and then just putting it on an SD card. I think that's the easiest way to get stuff to the printer, and I think it's also kind of the easiest because sometimes you just don't want to try and deal with Wi-Fi. I think that's everything for the printer. Going into slightly more technical details, the extruder assembly itself is what is known as a Mark 8 style extruder, and it's got a 0.4mm nozzle and is able to print at supposedly 0.1mm or 100 microns. That is very fine. Most things in front of me weren't actually printed at 100 microns. Most were printed at 150 or 200 microns. This, again, I'll put B-roll in. This is the Geyer Anderson cat from My Mini Factory and the Scan the World initiative. This is, the Geyer Anderson cat was sliced and printed at 100 microns. And you can kind of feel them if you run your nail across them. If you're just looking at them, you can't see the layer lines. You can see the slight bits of under extrusion, which is something I'll get to in a moment, but damn, this looks really, really good. How did all this go? Well, all of these printed, which sounds like a silly thing to praise, but if any of you have watched 3D printing videos on YouTube, you know that not always will something print. Take this cat, for example. This cat is the demo print that comes pre-sliced and pre-included on the P120. It was the first thing I printed with a new spool of filament, because the first thing I actually tried to print was this, but with the sample spool of filament they sent me, which was not enough by any means. I actually threw that print away, but I wish I didn't. But due to my utter idiocy, I tried to print another cat, this time in rigid ink matte blue, and it looks absolutely phenomenal until it ran out of filament. So this failed. this failure here, again, I'll put some B-roll in. As you can see by the tail, this is the Georg Anderson cat. This is why I can't have nice things. This was a Georg Anderson cat, and because I printed with a brim and not a raft, part of the leg got unstuck and moved and moved and moved until the leg completely failed, and I ended up with a bit of 3D printing spaghetti. Another one. I tried to print a pug. Same thing happened. One of the feet came up unstuck from the bed, and it couldn't continue to print. So I had to abort this. Painfully abort this, because this took a long time. This here, this one little sliver, was I think 11% into the print, and this took 2.5 hours, and then failed. Though these are not my most spectacular failures, that would be this. This is 3D printed spaghetti noodles, or I think I may have accidentally printed my brain. Quite bright, but also just an absolute mess. I can't even remember what I was trying to print when this happened. Yeah, as good as this printer is, and I'd say I have a good like 95% plus success rate here. Failures can still happen, no matter how good the printer is, and this is a very good printer. So what are the downsides? Well, it pretty much just comes down to documentation, or rather the lack of it. So as I told you, this printer has Wi-Fi. Nowhere in the manual does it tell you how to connect to Wi-Fi. It just tells you to download the 3D Prima 3D Creator app, connect to Wi-Fi, and it'll be done. Except it doesn't quite work like that. You have to turn the machine on, navigate the jog dial to the rightmost option, which I'm kind of blanking on right now. I think it's move. And instead of clicking it to get in, you click and hold, and that'll start what is essentially WPS mode. So you do that, and then you go to the app, and then you type in your Wi-Fi password. But it only works on 2.4 gigahertz. So if you're using a Wi-Fi router that has 2.4 and 5 gigahertz combined, you will have to use a phone or tablet or whatever device that only has a 2.4 gigahertz radio on it, which is surprisingly hard. I had to find an old smartphone that isn't really used, that was very low end, that only came with 2.4 gigahertz. Then I got it connected. Then I could do all the web stuff, but I found out that I could only use the app before I'd started printing. If the printer was printing and I opened the app, it would look like I'd have to start all over again and try and reconnect to Wi-Fi, which is an absolute pain in the arse. The other thing, this bed, as I said, I've put PEI on it. The PEI sheet, absolutely great. After putting it on, you have to level the bed. They don't tell you how to level the bed. I had to Google it and watch YouTube videos and still get it wrong a couple of times. There is a very deep hole melted in my PEI in this corner where I hadn't leveled the bed properly, and the 200-degree nozzle just plunged right into that PEI. Another time when I hadn't gotten it quite right was I tried to print a vase, and the outline of this vase base is gouged into this PEI. So the only real issues with this printer are completely avoidable, and they just require documentation, which is a pretty good problem to have because it's easily fixed. If something like the 101 Hero, that had a lot of hardware issues. This doesn't. This is solid. The only thing that matters, or the only thing that needs to be done, is some more documentation. And that's, well, that's fine. So I'm pretty much going to leave you here. I'm going to put a small little B-roll photo shoot of all the models I've printed to some music. That's been my review of the PrimaCreator P120, a desktop 3D printer for £250. That doesn't suck. Anyway guys, I've been Dom at Mobile Dom. You can find me at mobile_Dom, everywhere important, and you can see the written review of this printer at www.mobiletechtalk.co.uk, and that should be coming up in the coming weeks. Well, see ya.